Alice hurried outside without even wearing her coat, but when she stepped out, there was nothing outside. She knew she wasn't seeing an illusion, so she put on her coat and decided to go look further away. At this moment, Alice had no understanding of quantum entanglement. The reason she was able to see Joe just now was because there was a brief overlap between two parallel worlds. Joe, who was in the other world, had just arrived at the cabin. She had previously taken the quantum experiment equipment and planned to bring Alice here for temporary shelter. However, before she could enter the cabin, she heard someone calling her "Mom" in the distance, even though Alice was clearly right beside her. After they entered the cabin, they listened to the tape over and over again, which contained a conversation between Alice and Joe before the space station accident. Alice firmly stated that the voice on the tape wasn't hers because she never spoke Dutch. What shocked Joe even more was when Alice mentioned Joe introducing the experimental equipment during a video chat. However, Joe distinctly remembered that the space station had never conducted any experiments on quantum entanglement. This aligns perfectly with the plot from the previous episode where the commander's body existed in this world but his memories remained in another, which is why he insisted during the meeting that they were conducting quantum experiments while the command center stated that the experiment had been cancelled years ago. After listening to all the tapes, they gradually realized the existence of parallel worlds, especially a segment where the commander asked if Joe's body could be left on the space station. Alice finally said what she had been holding back for so long. She didn't believe the Joe in front of her was her real mother. This truth, though cruel, was also something Joe had been feeling, and she decided to uncover the truth. While outside storing the experimental equipment, Joe heard Alice's cry again. She couldn't believe it and rushed back to the cabin to find Alice already asleep. Was someone else calling her? Joe anxiously headed towards the source of the voice. Unfortunately, the Alice calling for her mother was actually in another parallel world, and the two never met halfway. After walking for a while, Alice saw the lights in front of the cabin. She didn't understand why there was an identical house here, with the keys hidden in the same place. Upon opening the door, she found the interior decor almost identical to her own cabin, but she searched every room and found no sign of Joe. Alice climbed into the closet on the second floor. The wind blew the closet door shut, causing panic as she frantically banged on the door and called for Joe. Suddenly, Joe heard the cries behind her and quickly turned around to see the cabin not far away illuminated by light. Not long after, the distressed Alice suddenly noticed that the closet door had been opened and Joe appeared before her eyes. Joe was equally trembling with excitement. She quickly brought Alice back to her own cabin, carefully sniffed the scent of Alice's hair, and confirmed that the Alice in front of her was indeed her daughter. Joe ran a bath for her, only to discover another Alice lying in bed. She felt dizzy for a moment, and when Joe came back to her senses, the Alice in the bathtub had disappeared, leaving only the Alice who had just woken up. Joe was certain that what she had just experienced wasn't an illusion. She told Alice that there was another cabin on the other side of the woods, and she had to find her daughter. The Alice in this world looked puzzled. Alice watched her mother's hurried departure and could only helplessly follow along. Meanwhile, the Alice from the other world was unaware that the two overlapping worlds had separated. After calling out for her mother, she realized that the hot water in the bathtub was gone. She quickly wrapped herself in a towel and walked out of the bathroom, coincidentally encountering Magnus, who had just woken up. Alice told him that she had encountered Joe, but Magnus dismissed it as her imagination running wild. Instead of explaining further, Alice waited until Magnus fell asleep again before leaving the cabin once more. She was convinced that there was another cabin at the other end of the forest, and Joe must be there. Meanwhile, Joe was leading the Alice from this world into the forest. Alice believes that the cabin she saw does not exist. After reuniting with the Alice from the other world, Joe's heart confirmed that the Alice in front of her was not her daughter. Alice quickly retorted, asking if she wasn't her mother, then who was she? Then, in retaliation, she snatched the backpack and casually threw it into the snow. She then planned to go home to find Magnus, but halfway there, she indeed stumbled upon a small cabin. Curious, Alice went inside to investigate and found that, apart from the murals on the walls, everything else was almost identical to her own cabin. She noticed a tape recorder on the table and decided to take it with her as she climbed into the closet upstairs. In the other world, Alice accidentally found a bead in the snow and took a few steps forward, only to spot Joe's backpack containing the experimental equipment. She guessed that Joe must be nearby, and her steps quickened. Soon enough, she arrived at the abandoned cabin, skillfully opening the door to find a live kitten inside. However, when the other Alice entered, she found a dead cat. Out of habit, she walked into the closet and discovered a tape recorder inside. Pressing the play button, she heard her own voice. It turned out the other Alice was also in the closet, recording her voice with the same tape recorder. Although they were in different parallel worlds, they were able to communicate across space through the tape recorder. Not long after, Joe also found the small cabin. She heard the sounds coming from the closet from a distance. Upon opening the closet door, she found nothing inside except for a tape recorder still playing Alice's voice. Joe realized that the Alice who had thrown her backpack must have returned to her own world, so she picked up the tape recorder and drove off to find her. However, she didn't notice that the kerosene lamp left on the table had been blown down by the strong wind, igniting the room. Joe suddenly felt a surge of panic as she listened to the conversation between the two Alices playing on the tape recorder. Although they were in parallel worlds, they saw each other through the mirror and talked about their experiences, even mentioning details like the color of the cars at their homes. Now they finally confirmed that parallel worlds truly existed. While driving, Joe suddenly noticed a bright light rising behind her. Realizing that the cabin was on fire, she quickly turned around, but as she sped towards the burning house, it transformed into her own cabin. Without hesitation, she rushed inside, but upon entering, the cabin turned back into the one where she found the tape recorder. Flames were burning on the mural on the wall, and the cat on the floor was dead, while a black cat wandered around. Joe didn't have time to delve into it and hurriedly ran upstairs. The Alice from this world was indeed hiding in the closet. However, what puzzled Joe was that she could hear the voice of the Alice from the other world through the tape recorder, but her own voice couldn't transmit over there. It could only be relayed by the Alice from this world. Joe vowed to find a way to reunite with the Alice from the other world. Just then, the raging flames broke through the mural, and thick smoke rose to the second floor. When the mirror in the closet shattered, flames spread from all around. Joe quickly grabbed Alice and ran outside. Meanwhile, Magnus was leading Henry and others towards the cabin in the woods. However, the road ahead was blocked by ice and snow, so they had to proceed on foot. Henry seemed to sense something and walked in another direction. Surprisingly, he found the backpack containing the experimental equipment in the snow, and the rising flames ahead also caught his attention. However, he kept recalling the commander's questioning, realizing that this was something happening in another world. With a gunshot, the two Henrys from different worlds were stunned as their consciousness unexpectedly swapped. After Joe escaped, she handed Alice to Henry, but he inexplicably left her lying on the snowy ground. This was because the Henry from the other world had long resigned from the command center and didn't recognize Alice, while the Henry from this world had many responsibilities. Upon seeing the commander fall, he immediately dialed for emergency assistance. However, Joe, rushing into the house, did not find the Alice from the other world. As she emerged, she was shocked to find Alice lying alone in the snow, her life hanging by a thread due to the freezing temperature. Joe immediately began emergency aid. However, when she turned her head, she unexpectedly saw the Alice from the other world. This Alice wanted to take Joe home, but Joe made the rational choice to save the unconscious Alice. At that moment, Magnus' call could be heard nearby. After Joe ensured Alice was with her father, personnel from the command center arrived, and the overlapping worlds separated once again. The Alice from the other world reunited with Magnus. Finally, Joe managed to revive the Alice from this world, but her real daughter had disappeared without a trace. Later, lying on the hospital bed, the Alice from this world dreamt of the astronaut's corpse and expressed her desire to take Alice to meet her real mother. The next moment, she woke up from the dream, wondering where Joe had gone. Magnus informed her that Irina had taken Joe away. Alice was shocked and insisted on rescuing Joe no matter what.